At 68 years old, with everything she owned, packed into 2 leather suitcases and a canvas roll of her father's woodworking tools, Eleanor Whitcomb raised her hand in a county courthouse annex and bought a boarded-up Victorian on a hill for $15. The crowd laughed. They called it a money pit, with a roof a curse the town had been trying to get rid of for 12 years. And they told her she had just thrown away what little she had left. But Eleanor had been taught a long time ago that nothing is ruined until you stop doing the work. So she climbed the hill that afternoon with her 2 suitcases and her father's tools. And on her third night there, when a half-wild black cat refused to leave a single stretch of upstairs wall, she peeled back the paper and found a door someone had sealed shut on purpose. Behind it, a room the whole town had spent 60 years pretending wasn't there. That was later. First there was the cemetery in Vermont and the foreclosure notice and the long bus ride back to a town she had not seen in 50 years. Before we go any further, if stories about quiet courage and second chances mean something to you, take a moment now to subscribe. Because what Eleanor found behind that wall changed not only her life, but the lives of people she did not yet know were waiting for her. She had buried Walter on a Tuesday in September. 47 years of marriage closed by a small graveside service in the rain, with a Methodist minister she barely knew reading from a Bible Walter had given her on their 10th anniversary. There were 6 people there. 3 of them were funeral home staff. The other 3 were neighbors who had liked Walter and had run out of casseroles to bring. Alzheimer's had taken him slowly across 3 years the way a tide takes a sandcastle. First, the small words, then the names of streets they had lived on, then her name. By the end, he had looked at her with the polite confusion of a man trying to be kind to a stranger in his own bedroom, and she had held his hand and said her own name out loud to him every morning, the way you might read a prayer to a child who could not yet understand it. The bills had started before the funeral and had not stopped after it. 3 years of memory care. 3 years of medications the insurance decided not to cover. 3 years of a man who could no longer feed himself and a wife who would not put him anywhere she could not visit twice a day. By the time Walter was gone, the house in Vermont was gone too, swallowed by a reverse mortgage and a lien. Eleanor had signed her name to without reading because she had been too tired to read anything that month. The bank gave her 30 days. She used 28 of them to pack. The other 2 she spent at the cemetery sitting on a folding chair beside the small bronze marker that said only Walter Whitcomb, and the 2 dates that contained the whole shape of his life. On the last morning, she stood in the driveway with 2 suitcases and the canvas roll of her father's tools that she had carried through every move of her adult life, and she tried to think of where to go. She had no children. She and Walter had wanted them, and the wanting had gone unanswered, and after a while they had stopped speaking of it. The way 2 people stop speaking of weather, they cannot change. There were no siblings. Her mother had been gone 20 years, her father since Eleanor was 14. There was only one place she could think of, and it was the place she had spent 50 years not thinking of. Calderwood, Pennsylvania, the town where she had been born, the town she had left at 18 on a Greyhound bus with a single suitcase and the same canvas roll of tools, swearing she would never come back. She could not have told you that morning in Vermont what made her buy a ticket for the place she had spent 5 decades avoiding. Maybe it was that a person who has lost everything goes back to where she started the way water finds the lowest ground. Maybe it was the dream she had been having for 3 weeks, the one where she was 9 years old again, walking up Quarry Street in the autumn light, and there was a house at the top of the hill she could not look at, and a woman in an upstairs window she could not see. She got off the bus in Calderwood on a grey October morning, and the town was smaller than she remembered, and quieter. The mill at the bottom of the river had closed in 1989. Half the storefronts on Main Street were boarded up. The Methodist church she had been baptized in still stood, and the minister, a young man with kind eyes who did not know her, let her sleep in the fellowship hall for 3 nights on the understanding that she would be moving on by Friday. She did not know where she was moving on to. On the 3rd day, she walked to the library because the library was warm and free, and on the corkboard by the returns desk, between a flyer for a quilting circle and a notice about a missing cat, someone had pinned a single sheet from the county. Public auction. Tax delinquent properties. Courthouse Annex, Thursday, 10 in the morning. She read the list without knowing why she was reading it. A flooded duplex on Elm, a weed lot behind the gas station, a storefront that had been 3 failed restaurants, and near the bottom in tiny print, the words that stopped her hand on the page. Parcel 41-9, Quarry Street, 2 stories plus turret. Condition listed as poor, the house at the top of the hill. The one her mother had warned her away from when she was small. The one with the woman in the upstairs window the other children had dared each other to look at. The house Eleanor had walked past every morning on her way to school for 9 years, and had never once dared to lift her eyes to. She went to the auction on Thursday morning because she could not think of a reason not to. The annex smelled of wet wool and burnt coffee. 20 or so people sat on folding chairs, most of them men, with the easy boredom of regulars. A few in good coats had clearly come to make money. Eleanor sat in the back in the only good dress she still owned with her purse on her lap, and $58 folded inside it in singles and a 5. And she watched hands go up, and money she would never have moved through the air like weather. When the auctioneer reached parcel 41-9, he paused. The pause was what made her look up. "The house on the hill," he said. "Some of you know it." A few people laughed. It was a low, familiar sound, the kind of laugh a room makes when it has made the same joke many times. "Quarry Street," he said. 2 stories plus turret. Back taxes going on 12 years. Sold as is where is. The county takes no responsibility. Takes no responsibility is right. A man near the front said. And that got a bigger laugh. A woman a few chairs over leaned to her neighbor. "That's the Vane place. My grandkids won't walk past it after dark." The auctioneer let it ride a second. Then he cleared his throat the way a man clears his throat before doing a thing he expects to have to take back. "We'll open at $15, he said. He said it the way you offer something nobody's going to take. $15 just to start the failure. $15 just to get to the part where he announced no bids and moved on to the next lot. Eleanor did the arithmetic before she decided to. $15 left her 43 and change. The fellowship hall would not have her past Friday. The shelter in the next county had a 6-week wait list. She thought about the Greyhound station with its row of plastic seats where a woman of 68 could sit until the security guard asked her kindly to move along. She thought about her father, dead 54 years now, and the day he had set a wrecked little side table in front of her when she was 12 and asked her what was wrong with it. Everything she had said. "Nothing's wrong with it that hands can't fix," he had told her. "A thing isn't ruined just because it's been left. It's ruined when nobody's willing to do the work." She raised her hand. She raised it slowly and steadily, the same motion she had used 1,000 times to lift a plane off the grain at the end of a stroke so it would not tear. For a second, nobody saw it. Then the auctioneer did, and his face did a small, complicated thing. "I've got 15, he said. $15 from the lady in the back. Do I hear 20? Nobody breathed to make it 20. One of the men in good coats turned all the way around in his chair to look at her. He was somewhere in his late 60s, well-groomed with the kind of carriage that came from having been listened to all his life. His expression was not pity. It was closer to annoyance, like she had reached past him for the last seat on a bus he had been planning to take. "Ma'am," the woman with the grandkids said, not unkindly. "You don't want that house." 15 going once, the auctioneer said. A man laughed and said, loud enough to carry, "Let her have the ghost. She can charge admission. Going twice." Eleanor kept her hand where it was, and her eyes on the front of the room, the way her father used to stand when a customer questioned his price. Calm, unhurried, certain of the work in his own hands. The gavel came down. "Sold," the auctioneer said. "The house on the hill to the lady in the back for $15. He shook his head as he wrote it down, and the room broke into the low murmuring that follows you out a door. She paid in singles and a 5 at the clerk's window. The clerk, a young man with a careful tie, slid a single sheet of paper across to her, and then a key on a loop of string, the brass dark with age. He held the key a half-second longer than he needed to. "You know about that place," he said. It was not a question. "I know it's mine now," Eleanor said. She folded the deed into her purse and walked out before he could decide to warn her about anything. She climbed Quarry Street that afternoon, with her 2 suitcases pulling on her shoulders and the canvas roll of her father's tools tucked under her arm. The street climbed the east side of town, past houses that got plainer and more tired the higher you went, until the pavement gave out into cracked concrete, and the trees grew up close on both sides. She stopped twice to catch her breath. 68 is not 18, and the hill had not gotten kinder in 50 years. At the top, where the street ran out against the slope, the house stood by itself on a double lot behind a fence that had surrendered years ago. Two children on bicycles had trailed her the last block, hanging back, daring each other closer. When she turned up the walk, the boy braked hard. "You're not going in there," he said. He couldn't have been more than 10. "It's mine," Eleanor told him. "I live here now." The two of them looked at each other. "Nobody lives there." The girl said almost gently, like she was correcting an adult who had gotten a simple fact wrong. "There's a lady. My uncle saw her in the window when he was a kid. She's been dead a long time." "That's probably a cat," Eleanor said. Neither of them looked like they believed her. They stood on the pedals and pushed off fast down the hill, and one of them yelled something over her shoulder that the wind took before it reached her. She stopped at the broken gate and made herself look at the house. It was a tall, narrow Victorian with a round turret on the corner, 3 stories of it reaching up into a grey sky. The paint had gone the color of old bone. Most of the windows were boarded, and the ones that weren't stared down at her blank and dark. The porch sagged on one side where a post had rotted through. A wild rose gone feral had climbed the whole north wall and pulled half a gutter loose. Everybody who looked at this house saw a haunted house. Eleanor stood at the gate and made herself see it the way her father would have. She saw a roof. She saw bones. A movement in an upstairs window made her flinch. She looked up in time to see a pale shape slip back into the dark low and quick, and her heart went hard for a second until she understood the shape of it. A cat. A big black one watching her from behind the glass. The front steps held her weight barely. The key fought the lock, then gave. The door swung inward on a long groan into a hall full of grey light, and the smell of dust and cold ash, and something faintly sweet underneath like old paper and dried lavender. She stood on the threshold of the first thing she had owned in her own name since she was a girl, and she listened to the house be quiet around her. "Hello," she said, and felt foolish, and said it anyway. Nothing answered. But somewhere deeper in the house, soft on bare boards, she heard the cat moving. She went in. The hall opened into rooms gone to ruin in the patient way empty houses go. Plaster down in sheets, a chandelier furred with cobweb, a staircase curving up into shadow with a banister she could tell at a touch was good solid oak under the grime. She moved through slow cataloguing damage and worth at the same time, the habit so deep she did not notice she was doing it. The floors were wide plank and sound. The windows that weren't boarded were old wavy glass, the kind nobody made anymore. Whoever had built this house had built it to last past them. It was in the back hall that she stopped because the back hall did not make sense. A row of hooks ran along the wall at waist height. Below them, a second row set at the height of a child. Dozens of hooks, far more than any family would ever need. She stood looking at them, and then she turned and saw the door frame into what must have been the dining room, and the paint there was scarred top to bottom with pencil marks. Little horizontal lines, each with a date and a name beside it in different hands. The lowest were a few feet off the floor. The highest were over her head. She crouched. The bad knee she had earned 3 years ago carrying Walter to and from the bathroom protested, and she ignored it. She read the closest marks. A name she couldn't make out and a date from 1971. Another name, another year. Some lines had been drawn over the names, faded, the dates running back decades. A growth chart. Not for one child, for more children than she could count. She read until her eyes hurt, and then she stood up slowly, one hand on the doorframe, and walked into the kitchen. It was the size of a small restaurant's, a range built for cooking in quantity, a long scarred work table, shelves built for more plates than any family owns. Eleanor stood in the middle of it with her 2 suitcases still in her hands and felt the first real prickle of something she could not name. Not fear. The house wasn't frightening. It felt under the ruin like a place that had been full of people, and she could not work out who they had been or where they had gone, or why a house that had clearly held so many had been left to rot on a hill while the town below crossed the street to avoid its shadow. She was still standing there when the cat came down to find her. It appeared in the doorway, the black Tom from the window, lean and ragged-eared, watching her with green eyes that held no fear at all. It looked at her for a long moment, the look you would give a stranger who had wandered into your house. "I bought it," Eleanor told the cat. Fair and square, $15. The cat turned and walked back into the hall and stopped, then looked over its shoulder at her waiting. She had grown up around enough strays to know what that meant. She set down her suitcases and followed. It led her up the curving stairs, sure-footed, where the boards were soft along the corridor on the second floor, past 3 bedroom doors, and then it stopped at the very end of the hall at a stretch of wall, papered in a faded pattern of cabbage roses, and it sat down and stared at the wall and would not move. There's nothing there, Eleanor said. The cat did not so much as flick an ear. It stared at the wall like there was a door behind it. After a moment, Eleanor stopped looking at the cat and started looking at the wall too, at how the hallway ran, at the rooms she had just passed, at the size of the house from the street. The hall ended too soon. She was sure of it. From the broken gate, the second floor had run the whole length of the house all the way to the turret. From in here, it stopped a good 15 feet short at a wall covered in cabbage roses, with a cat sitting in front of it like it had been waiting 12 years for somebody to come up and ask the right question. She reached out and pressed her palm flat against the paper. Behind it, faint and cool, came the draft of a space that the rest of the house did not know was there. The cat looked up at her, then back at the wall, patient as a clock. The light through the boarded windows had gone the color of ash. She had no electricity. She had a single kerosene lantern she had bought at a hardware salvage yard on the way up the hill from a broad-shouldered woman named Lena Marsh, who had taken one look at her and refused to take full price for anything. And her father's first rule had always been that you don't take a thing apart in the dark. Whatever was sealed behind the cabbage roses had waited longer than her marriage had lasted. It could wait until morning. She went back down the stairs to make herself a place to sleep on the floor of a house she owned. The cat stayed at the wall a while longer before it came down to find her. She slept in her coat on a nest of folded sheets in the front parlor, with the canvas roll of her father's tools laid beside her, like a hand she could reach for in the dark. The cold came up through the boards. The house talked the whole night. The small sounds old houses make a tick in the walls, a long sigh in the chimney, a loose board settling overhead. Twice she woke sure she had heard footsteps, and both times it was the cat walking its rounds. Toward morning it came and lay against her back, a warm weight, and she let it. You stay, you eat, she told it. It was the only deal she had ever known how to offer anything. The cat did not argue. By morning she had started calling it Soot for the color of it, and because it slept curled in the dead fireplace like it belonged to the ash. She had half expected to wake that first morning and talk herself out of it. A sensible person would walk back down the hill, find the minister ask about beds in the next county. A sensible person at 68 did not take on a roof with 12 winters of weather in it. But she had woken under a roof with her own name on the deed, the first one she had owned outright since Walter's diagnosis, and handing the key back to the county was the one thing she knew she would not do. The first day she walked the house with her hands. That was how her father had taught her to look at a thing. With fingers, not eyes, because eyes lie and wood doesn't. The plaster was a loss in most rooms. Plaster is just plaster. The bones were good. The big beams overhead were dry and true. The roof had one bad place over the back bedroom, where the sky showed through in a ragged coin of light, and the rain had been getting in there for years. But it was one place, and one place could be patched. She stood in the ruined kitchen and made a list in her head the way her father had taught her. One bite at a time. Stop the water first, then a door that locks, then light, then warmth. She had $43 and change. Down the hill she went with the lantern in her hand, back to the salvage yard at the edge of the old industrial blocks where the sign in faded paint read, "Reuse and Reclaim." The bell over the door announced her. Lena Marsh looked up from a ledger and pushed her reading glasses into her gray hair. "You came back," Lena said. "Looked you over yesterday and figured you were either coming back today or not at all." "I need a roof patch," Eleanor said. "Tarp roofing cement, whatever's cheapest. And a hasp for the front door." Lena set down her pen and came out from behind the counter. She was somewhere in her 60s, broad-shouldered with forearms that said she moved her own stock. She loaded a cart herself, and Eleanor noticed the prices she wrote down were not the prices on the tags. "I'm not a charity case," Eleanor said quietly. "Nobody said you were," Lena said. "You're a customer keeping the rain off the Vane house. Far as I'm concerned, that makes you a customer for life. You can owe me." She paused with one hand on a coil of rope. Whitcomb, she said. You said your name was Whitcomb. Eleanor. Lena straightened. Her glasses came down off her hair. Hollis Whitcomb's girl, she said slowly. The cabinet maker. Lived 3 streets back of the rail yard. He was my father, Eleanor said. The kitchen in this town had not said his name in 50 years. Hearing it out loud was like being touched. Lord, Lena said. Lord, you came back. She looked at Eleanor a long moment over the cart. I knew a girl named Ellie Whitcomb in the 3rd grade. Sat 1 row over from me at Calderwood Elementary. Quiet thing. Used to come to school with sawdust in her hair. That was me, Eleanor said. Lena reached out and put her square calloused hand on Eleanor's wrist, brief and hard. Welcome home, Ellie, she said. About 50 years late, but welcome home. Eleanor could not speak for a moment. She had not heard that name in 5 decades. Nobody alive had called her Ellie since her father died. She paid what Lena would let her pay. Lena threw in the lantern oil for free and pressed a wrapped sandwich into her hand at the door and would not hear about it. Eat while you work, Lena said. You're all elbows. The story on that house, Eleanor said before she left. Everybody at the auction laughed. The kids on the hill think it's haunted. What is it? Lena leaned on a stack of doors and folded her arms. Depends who you ask, she said. Ask the county. It's a tax write-off they couldn't give away. Ask the kids. It's haunted. There's a dead woman walks the upstairs with a lamp. Ask me, I'll tell you the truth. Which is that Odessa Vane lived in that house near 60 years, and she never turned a soul away. And this town decided that was the strangest thing it ever heard of. She paused. I called it the only sane thing on the block. What did she do up there? Lena's eyes had gone somewhere else. That she said is a longer story than your roof can wait for. You come back when the rain stopped, and I'll feed you and tell you some of it. She handed Eleanor the lantern. Go on, lights burning. Odessa would have liked you, she said when Eleanor was at the door. She had a soft spot for the ones who turned up with nothing and didn't ask for a thing. Eleanor climbed the hill with more than she had come down with, and a strange tightness in her throat she did not have a name for. She patched the roof that afternoon. It was cold, ugly work balanced on a slope at 68 years old, with the tarp snapping in the wind and the roofing cement freezing on the trowel. But when she came down at last, the cone of sky over the back bedroom was gone, and the house was for the first time in 12 years dry. She stood in the yard and looked up at her work. Soot watched from the windowsill. The next morning she went at the front door. It had swollen in its frame across a decade of wet winters. She took it off its hinges, laid it across 2 sawhorses she made from the porch rubble, and unrolled the canvas tool roll on the porch step. Her father's block plane fit her hand like it had grown there. She set the iron fine and went to work down the swollen edge, and the shavings came off in long curls that smelled of a 100-year-old door, and the rhythm of it emptied her head of everything but the wood. For the first time since Walter had stopped knowing her name, Eleanor's hands knew exactly what they were doing, and the room she was working in got easier instead of harder. That was when she remembered the cat at the wall. She climbed the stairs at the end of the day with the lantern and a putty knife. Soot was already there, sitting in front of the cabbage roses, as if it had not moved in a year. She got down on her knees beside it, both her bad knee and her good one cracking in the quiet hallway, and she started to read the wall with her fingers. The paper was newer than the paper everywhere else. That was the first wrong thing. Everywhere else the wallpaper had faded and curled and gone to ruin. But this stretch was tight and whole, like it had been hung long after the rest, hung over something. She slid the putty knife under a seam and peeled. The paper came away in a long strip. Underneath was not plaster. Underneath were boards, wide pine boards nailed flat across the wall in a rectangle taller than she was. And around the edges of the rectangle she could see now the casing of a door frame that someone had covered on purpose. A door boarded shut, papered over, hidden from a house that had forgotten it was there. She sat back on her heels, and her heart was going hard. All right, she said to the cat. Her voice came out unsteady. All right, you were right. She fit the claw of her father's old pry bar into the first board and set her weight against it and pulled. The first board came loose with a shriek of nails that echoed down the empty hall. The second came easier. By the time she had pulled the fourth and could see the door hole behind them, the light outside had gone. and the only light left was the small gold circle of the lantern and the green coins of the cat's eyes watching beside her. The door had no lock, just a porcelain knob gone yellow with age. She wrapped her hand around it, cold and smooth, and it turned. It swung inward without a sound on hinges someone had oiled before they sealed it into a darkness that smelled of dust and dry paper, and very faint underneath of lavender. Eleanor lifted the lantern and held it through the doorway, and the light reached in and found the first thing. A small iron bed made up neat, a quilt folded square at the foot, like whoever slept there had stepped out that morning and would be back by dark. She stepped through the doorway and lifted the lantern higher, and the room came up out of the dark around her. It was the missing end of the house, wide and low under the slope of the roof, with the round wall of the turret bulging out at the far end, and a single tall window there. The window the town had seen a light in and called a ghost. The window was painted over on the inside with black paint. Careful work, so no light would show. Somebody had not wanted to be seen up here. Somebody had sat up here anyway year after year in the dark with the lamp. The walls were shelves floor to ceiling both sides, and the shelves were full of small boxes, hundreds of them, shoebox size and smaller, each one labeled on the end in a careful hand. She lifted the lantern to the nearest and read, "A name, a year, another name, another year." The years went back and back. On the writing desk under the painted window lay a thick book bound in cracked black leather, and it was the only thing in the room without dust on it because the dust on it had been wiped by a hand more than once across the years. Eleanor sat down in the chair at the desk, the chair where an old woman had sat in the dark for 60 years, and she opened the book to the first page. At the top, in ink gone brown with age, it said, "The children of this house." And under that, a single line. Every one of them was somebody's. We just kept them until somebody remembered. Then the entries began. She read by lantern light until the lantern had to be trimmed, and then she read more. Decade on decade in the same hand, getting shakier with the years. Children dropped at the door in the night with notes pinned to them that all said the only thing there was to say: please, just for a while. Girls who came pregnant and frightened and left with a plan. Boys the county had given up on. Twin brothers whose mother had died and whose father drank, kept 4 years. Both in the army now and both writing every Christmas. A girl who had not spoken a word the whole 8 months she stayed, and under her name only this: "She's safe now." Eleanor read that one and had to set the book down and press the heels of her hands against her eyes until the burning behind them stopped. The house had not been haunted. The house had been a place that took in the children nobody else would for 60 years, run by one woman who never told the town what she was doing because the town would have found a way to stop her. Odessa Vane had spent her whole life on the children the world had thrown away. And when she got too old to take any more in, she had not bragged about it or built a monument to it. She had gathered up every trace of every child she had ever saved and the keepsakes they had left behind, and she had sealed it all into a room and painted the window black so no one would come looking. And she had sat with it in the dark until she died. And then the house had waited 12 years for somebody to find the door. Eleanor turned the page with shaking hands. She did not know yet what she was looking for. She would not for another hour when her eyes fell on a single entry in the spring of 1971, with a name across the top of it that she had loved for 47 years and had buried 4 weeks ago. But before she found it, she sat in the chair by the painted window in the dark in a house she had bought for $15 on a morning when she had nothing left. And for the first time since the cemetery in Vermont, she felt the room get easier around her instead of harder. Soot jumped onto the desk and lay down across the open book warm against her hand and watched her with green eyes that had been watching this room for a long time. "You knew," Eleanor whispered to the cat. "You knew this was here all along." The cat did not answer. The lamp burned low and steady in the turret window for the first time in 12 years. And down in the town below, without knowing why, an old woman driving home from her sister's lifted her eyes to the hill and saw it and pulled her car over to the side of the road and put one hand over her mouth and began to cry. She turned the page in the chair by the painted window, and then she turned another, and the entries went on, decade folding into decade. And somewhere past midnight, her eyes began to fail her in the lantern light, and she had to hold the book up close to read it. And that was when she saw the name. Walter Whitcomb, 1971, age 12. She did not move for a long time. The page swam. She set it down on the desk because her hands had begun to shake, and she pressed her palms flat against the wood, and she breathed the way the hospice nurse had taught her to breathe in the last week of Walter's life. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, slow, slow. Walter Whitcomb. The boy who had become the man who had become her husband for 47 years had sat at a table somewhere in this house when he was 12 years old, and she had not known. Not in the autumn they had met at the community college in 1978. Not in the small Methodist ceremony where they had said their vows in front of a borrowed minister and 20 folding chairs. Not in the 47 years afterward of him sitting across from her at breakfast every morning of her life. Not at the end, when his memory had emptied of every name, including hers, and not one of the words he had lost on his way out had been the name of this town or this house. He had carried it the whole time, and he had never told her. She lifted the book again, slow now, with the care of a woman handling a thing that might break in her hands. She found the entry. It was longer than most. Walter came in March. His father passed in February. Mother could not manage. Brought him up the hill herself on a Tuesday and could not look at him when she set the bag down. 12 years old, tall for his age, quiet as a held breath. Stayed 11 months. Went home that February when his mother remarried a decent enough man. I told her plainly that he was welcome back any time and meant it. He never came back. He wrote me 3 times the first year. Then once on his graduation. Then once when he married a young woman named Eleanor in 1979. And sent me a photograph from the church steps. She's the prettiest thing I have ever seen, he wrote. I think she will be good to me. I think I will try to deserve her. I have kept that photograph. Eleanor stopped reading because she could not see the page. She set the book down very gently. She got up out of the chair, the bad knee almost giving on her, and she walked the row of shelves with the lantern lifted, scanning the boxes until she found the one with his name on the end. Walter, 1971. It was the size of a small shoebox. She carried it to the desk and set it down beside the book, and she sat with her hands on either side of it for a full minute before she could make them open the lid. Inside, neatly arranged, were the small things of an 11-month boyhood. A black and white photograph, 3 inches square, of a tall, thin boy of about 12, standing on the porch of this very house. The wild rose was not feral yet. The boy's hair was cut close to his head, and he was not smiling, but he was looking at the camera, the way Walter had always looked at a camera, full on, without hiding. Eleanor would have known him at any age. She had married that face. She had buried that face 4 weeks ago. A school report card from 6th grade with every grade circled in red, and a note in Odessa's hand. He works above his class. Pay attention to this one. A blue ribbon from a county fair for a wooden box he must have made in shop class, the date written on the back. A small folded paper that turned out to be a Christmas card he had drawn for Odessa in 1971, with a snowman on the front and inside, in careful pencil, to Miss Vane, thank you for the warm bed. Love, Walter. And beneath that, taped to the bottom of the box, a long envelope sealed with 3 words on the front in Walter's own handwriting. If she finds it. She held the envelope a long time. She knew his hand the way a woman knows the inside of her own wrist. He had written her grocery lists for 40 years. He had written her one love letter when she was 40, and they had lost the last pregnancy, and she had it folded in her wallet still. He had signed her birthday cards, your Walter, always, every single year. If she finds it. He had known, somehow, he had known she might come here. She broke the seal. The paper inside was a single sheet folded once. Eleanor, I came back in the spring of 1995. I never told you. I am sorry for that. The reason I never told you is that I was ashamed for too long. And then by the time I was not ashamed any longer, I did not know how to put it into words you would not be hurt by. I came up here on a business trip, and I climbed the hill on the second afternoon, and Odessa was still alive. She was very old. She made me tea on a hot plate in this room. We sat together for 2 hours. She said to me, Walter, write a letter and leave it here. The house knows what it is doing. If a day ever comes when somebody who matters to you needs this house, the house will bring them up the hill, and they will find the room, and they will find this letter. You can spend the rest of your life not telling her, and that is fine. You can be ashamed of it the way you have been, and that is fine too. But leave the letter. The rest is up to the house. I did what she said. I'm writing this to you in a kitchen below your kitchen, in a house I have not let myself think about in 24 years. Because an old woman told me to, and because I have always done what kind women have told me to do. I do not know if you will ever read this. I hope you do not have to. I hope I have a long life with you. And we die old in the same year, and nobody ever has to find anything. But if you are reading it, my Eleanor, then the worst has happened. And you are alone. And the house has brought you up the hill because there was nowhere else for you to go. And I want to tell you something. I was a frightened boy here. I was 11 months under this roof. And I went to sleep every night in a bed that was warm and woke up to a breakfast somebody had made for me, and I did not understand any of it. I thought I would owe somebody for it eventually. Nobody ever came to collect. When I was older, I understood that it had been a gift, a whole gift, with no string on it. You and I never had children. I know what that cost you. I know I never said the right thing about it the right way. I want you to know that I have carried the gift Odessa Vane gave me for 50 years. And every kindness I tried to do you in our life together, I learned in the back bedroom of that house. I was 12 years old, and a woman I did not know took me in for nothing and gave me back the idea that the world could be soft. I have tried to be soft to you ever since. If you are reading this in that room, please do for the next one what she did for me. I do not know who they will be. I trust you to know when they come. I love you. I have loved you. I love you still. Your Walter. Always. Eleanor folded the letter back along its crease. She sat in the dark. The lantern guttered, and she did not reach to trim it. After a long time, the cat climbed into her lap and lay down across her thighs and pressed its head into her stomach. And she put her hand on the cat without looking down, and she let the room hold her. She did not cry. She had cried herself out 4 weeks ago, and the crying had not changed a single thing on a single desk. But she made a sound she had not made since the funeral. A single low sound that came out of her chest from a place she had thought was empty, and the cat did not move for the rest of the night. She slept that night in the small iron bed in the turret room with Walter's letter folded under the pillow and the cat curled in the crook of her knees. She had not meant to. She had only meant to lie down for a minute. When she woke, the sun was coming through the painted window in cracks where the paint had begun to flake, and the lantern had burned itself out, and she was 68 years old, and she had a roof, and she had a reason, and she did not yet have a plan. That morning, she went down the hill. She found Lena in the back of the salvage yard, kneeling beside a wood stove with a wrench in her hand. Lena looked up and saw her face and put the wrench down and stood. "You found something," Lena said. "Walter was here," Eleanor said. "My Walter. In 1971. He was 12. He lived in that house for 11 months and he never told me. Not in 47 years. He wrote me a letter and left it in a box on a shelf in a sealed room because an old woman told him to. He left it there in 1995 and he died last month. And I bought the house for $15 and the cat showed me the wall." Lena did not say anything for a moment. She walked across the yard to a work table and sat down on a stool and gestured at the stool across from her, and Eleanor sat. "Tell me," Lena said. Eleanor told her. When she was done, Lena got up and went into the office and came back with 2 paper cups of coffee from a percolator that had been running since 6 in the morning, and she pushed one across. "There were a lot of us," Lena said quietly, "whose lives that woman touched and never asked for credit for. We knew the older ones in this town. We knew a little. You would see a new kid in town staying up at the Vane place, and then a few months later, they would be gone and nobody asked. Walter must have come and gone the year before I started paying any attention. There were boys in my class one year and not the next, and I never thought to wonder where a person goes." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "We told ghost stories about her," Lena said. "Our parents told them, and we told them, and our kids told them, and the kids on the hill yesterday told them to you. We let our children dare each other to touch her fence. The whole time she was the only one in this town doing the actual work of loving the kids it threw out. Why did she not tell anybody? Because in 1960 the county would have shut her down for running an unlicensed home, and in 1980 they would have done it for the same reason, and she knew it. Easier to be a ghost. A ghost can keep working. A do-gooder gets a visit from the inspector. The word landed between them like a dropped tool. I have to tell you something else, Eleanor said. There was a man at the auction, late 60s, good coat, turned around in his chair to look at me when I bid. The clerk said his name later, Royce Tennant. Lena's face did a thing. He came up the hill the same afternoon, Eleanor said. Offered me $12,000 and a moving company for the lot. When I said no, he came back yesterday with a paper from the county. There is a hearing 9 days from now to decide whether they tear the house down. Lena set her coffee down very carefully. Royce Tennant has been trying to get that lot for 3 years, Lena said. He has put senior housing and a clinic and a strip of new retail down the east side of this town, and he could not buy that lot because of the back taxes, and he could not get the county to condemn it fast enough. Because frankly, nobody at the county wanted to be the one to send a wrecking crew up that hill. There were too many old people who would have known what it was, even if they could not have said. She looked at Eleanor. You own it now. He sees a 68-year-old woman with no money and no lawyer. You just made it easy. So what do I do? Eleanor said. I have 9 days and $43. Lena was quiet a moment. Then she reached across the table and gripped Eleanor's wrist the way she had gripped it the day before. Hard and brief. You let me think on it. I have lived in this town 65 years and I owe a few favors I never called in. There are more of us than you would guess who are ashamed of how we treated that woman. We just need a reason to stop being cowards about it. She nodded toward the hill. You keep that window lit every single night until the hearing. I will come find you when I have something. Eleanor went home with that sitting in her chest, and she worked on the house with a new kind of focus. She scraped the black paint off the inside of the turret window, careful work with a razor blade, because that felt like the first thing to do. She did not know yet why. By the second afternoon, the window was clear glass again, and that night when she lit the lantern in it for the first time without the paint, the gold light spilled out across the dark roof slope and showed the whole town below that the upstairs room of the haunted house had a lamp in its window once more. By the second night, the first one came up the hill. Eleanor heard the car laboring up the bad pavement and went out onto the porch with the lantern, half expecting Royce, half expecting the inspector. Instead, a sedan stopped at the gate and a silver-haired woman got out slowly, leaning on a cane in a good coat that had been good a long time ago. She stood at the broken gate and looked up at the lit window in the turret and put her free hand over her mouth. That light, she said. Her voice shook. That light has been off for years. I drove past tonight from my sister's, and I saw it on and I had to. I'm sorry. I had to come up. Can I help you? Eleanor called. I lived here. The woman steadied herself on the gate. A long time ago, when I was a girl. I did not have anywhere else and she took me in. I never thought I would see that window lit again in my life. Eleanor came down the walk and helped her up the broken porch steps and brought her inside and sat her in the one good chair. And the woman looked around the ruined hall with tears running down the lines of her face and a smile under them. It was so warm in here, the woman said. You would not think it to look at it now. There were always kids. There was always something cooking. She made you do your schoolwork at that big table, and she did not ask you a single thing about where you came from, unless you wanted to tell her. She looked at Eleanor. How long were you here before? I was not, Eleanor said. I just bought it 3 weeks ago, $15 at the county auction. But my husband was here. He died last month. He was 12, 1971. I did not know until last night. The woman stared at her. Then she laughed a wet, astonished laugh. Of course, she said. Of course he was. That is exactly how it goes. She always said the house would find the next one. She caught Eleanor's hand in both of hers, and her grip was stronger than it looked. You are one of us, she said. You just got here the long way around. My name is Margaret Holloway. I was here in 1966. I was 13, and my own mother had put a cigarette out on my arm, and the school had finally noticed. And they did not know what to do with me, and somebody whispered the name of the house on the hill. I stayed 2 years. She made me do my homework, and she made me apply to nursing school, and she did not let me believe for 1 minute that I was unfixable. She held Eleanor's hand. I worked at the county hospital for 38 years. I delivered babies. I sat with old men in their last hours. I held the hand of more frightened people than I can count. None of it would have happened without that room upstairs. She wiped her face. What happened to her? Eleanor asked. At the end. Margaret's voice softened. She got old, same as everybody. She could not manage the stairs, could not cook for a houseful anymore. The last few years she could not take anybody in at all, and I think that broke her worse than her own body did. It was just her up here and the cat and all those boxes. People saw her lamp in the window and crossed to the other side of the street. I always meant to come up the hill. I never did. Her voice cracked. Do not let that window go dark again. Whatever you have to do, you keep it lit. They talked until late. Before Margaret left, Eleanor took her up to the room and showed her the shelves, and Margaret found her own box from 1966 and held it in her hands and could not speak for a long time. Inside it was a photograph of a thin girl of 13 and a hair ribbon and a report card with every grade circled in red and a note in Odessa's hand. Stayed 2 years. Scared of everything when she came. Scared of nothing when she left. Went to nursing school. The proudest I ever was. She kept it. Margaret whispered. All this time. She kept all of it. After Margaret had gone, Eleanor went back up to the room and kept reading because Margaret had given her a reason she had not had before. These were not entries anymore. These were people. People still out there scattered across the years and the country, who had once been saved in this house by a woman the town called a ghost. She started a list of her own on the back of an envelope. Names and last known towns and any details she could find. She did not know yet what she would do with it. It just felt wrong to let them stay lost a second time. The next 2 days more came. A man in his early 70s stopped his pickup at the gate on the third evening and walked up the porch steps, slowly twisting a cap in his hands. And he said his name was Frank Bellamy. And he had been a boy in this house in 1962 when he was 8 years old. And his father had been a violent man, and his mother had quietly arranged with a pastor 2 counties over to send him here for a winter while she got her life apart from the husband. And he had stayed 3 months and learned to read above grade level at the big kitchen table. He had worked 35 years on the railroad. He had retired in 2019. His own grown daughter did not know he had ever been here. Walter was here, Eleanor told him. My husband. Frank's face went still. In 71, she said. He had to sit down on the porch step. I knew a Walter Whitcomb in this town, Frank said. He grew up to be a good man. He helped me put a new roof on my mother's house in 1985. He never said a word the whole day except thank you for the lemonade. I always thought there was something in him I recognized, and I never knew what it was. He looked at Eleanor. It was this, he said. It was this house. We were both here. He looked away to keep his face. Lord, he never told me either. He stayed 2 hours. He went home and came back the next morning with a toolbox and a thermos of coffee, and without saying anything, he climbed into the attic with her and helped her shore up a sagging joist over the back bedroom that she had not been strong enough to lift alone. He did not take any money, and he did not say very much. And when he left, he said, I will be up tomorrow, if you will have me, and Eleanor said, please. The town was waking up around the house, and the house was waking up under her hands. 6 days before the hearing, an unmarked sheriff's car pulled into the gate. A man in a windbreaker got out with a clipboard. He introduced himself as the county building inspector, and he said he was sorry, ma'am, but he had been ordered to make a preliminary assessment of the structure ahead of the hearing, and he would like to walk through if she did not mind. She did mind. She let him in anyway. He walked the house with his clipboard, and he wrote, and he did not say much. He stood in the kitchen and frowned. He stood under the patched roof in the back bedroom and frowned. He stood in the front parlor where Eleanor had been refinishing the floor by hand for 2 days and looked at her work and said nothing at all. At the front door, he paused. Mrs. Whitcomb, he said quietly, I want you to understand something. The pressure to recommend demolition is not coming from me. It is coming from upstairs. He looked at the porch railing she had rebuilt herself. I have inspected this house twice before in the last 6 years. Both times I was told to write it up unsafe. Both times I did because that was what I was told. He met her eyes. I am not telling you to fight it. I am only telling you that I am not the one you have to convince. The one you have to convince has a lot of money in the senior housing on Maple Street. He touched the brim of his cap. I will write what I see, he said. I am not promising more than that. He drove away. That night, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open and the envelope of names beside it. And she made herself read the entries from 1959, because some part of her had been avoiding them for 2 days. She found it on the third page. Adela came in November, 17 years old, 8 months along and frightened half to death. Sent here by Pastor Harkness over in Beaver County, who knew where to send the ones who had nowhere else to go. Her people had told her not to come home. She would not say who the father was, and I did not ask. Stayed through the winter. Had the boy here in the back bedroom on the 4th of April with Dr. Henley, who never charged me a dime in 40 years. Her people took her back once it was over. She married a hard man named Tennant the next spring, and she never spoke of the year she lost. But I kept track the way I keep track of all of them. That boy of Adela's grew up right here in this town and never knew where his first breath was drawn. He builds things now. Half the east side has his name on it. Eleanor turned the page slowly. There was a line at the bottom of the entry that had been added later in a hand grown older and shakier than the rest. He does not know. His mother carried it to her grave. But it is written here in case the day ever comes that somebody needs to give it back to him. Eleanor read it twice, then a third time. Then she sat very still in the kitchen of a house she had bought for $15, and she understood with a small cold weight in her chest exactly what she was holding in her 2 hands. Royce Tennant had been born in the back bedroom of the house he was trying to tear down. The same back bedroom Frank Bellamy had shored up a joist over the day before. The same back bedroom Walter Whitcomb had slept in for 11 months when he was 12. The hearing was 6 days away. The man who wanted to send a wrecking crew up this hill had taken his first breath under this roof, and he did not know. And the only proof of it in the world was sitting on her kitchen table in a dead woman's handwriting. Outside, the wind came up off the slope and rattled the loose pane in the back hall. Eleanor folded the page carefully along its crease and slid it inside the ledger and closed the book, and she sat with both her hands flat on the cover for a long time, and she did not yet know what she was going to do with it. She carried the page with her for 2 days. Folded one slid into the inside pocket of her coat against her ribs, where she could feel the weight of it through the cloth whenever she moved. She slept with it under her pillow beside Walter's letter. She worked on the front parlor floor with it riding warm against her side. She climbed into the attic with Frank Bellamy a second time and helped him set a second joist, and the whole time the page was there. And she thought about it the way you think about a loaded thing you are carrying in a house with children. It was a weapon. She understood that much. She could walk into Royce Tennant's office on Maple Street and lay the page on his desk and watch him understand that she could tell the whole town where he came from. That the hard developer who had spent 30 years building a small empire on the east side had been born to a frightened 17-year-old girl in a back bedroom of the house he was calling an eyesore. She could make him stop. People had made her do things her whole life by holding the one card she could not beat. The bank had done it. The hospital had done it. The reverse mortgage company had done it through a 40-page contract she had been too tired to read. She thought about it for 2 days. On the third morning, 4 days before the hearing, she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, and she watched the gray light come up over the back roof, and she decided. She would rather lose the house than keep it like that. She told Lena that afternoon at the salvage yard, sitting on the same stool with the same percolator coffee, and she told her about the room and the boxes and Walter's letter and the entries she had read in the ledger. She told her almost everything. She did not tell her about Adela. Not yet. That part was not hers to spend. Lena listened with her hands wrapped around her cup, and when Eleanor was done, Lena set the cup down and pushed back from the table. I have made 14 phone calls in the last 6 days, Lena said. There are more of us in this town than I knew. Frank told 2 people. Margaret told 4. Those 4 told 9. There is a retired teacher named Ruth Carrigan who sent kids quietly up the hill for 30 years and never once asked Odessa what happened to them. And Ruth has not stopped crying since Tuesday, and she has called everybody she ever taught. Lena looked at her. There are going to be people at that hearing on Tuesday, she said. I do not yet know how many, but they are coming. Eleanor nodded. She could not quite trust her voice. There is one more thing, Lena said. There is a man named Dr. Henley. He is 94. He delivered babies in this county for 53 years. He delivered a baby in the back bedroom of that house in the spring of 1959 for a girl named Adela, who later married a man named Tennant. He's in a nursing home in Allentown. His mind is mostly gone. But one of his old nurses said he kept a private journal his whole career, and his daughter has it. Lena watched her face. "I will not pull on that thread without your say-so," she said. "I'm only telling you it is there." Eleanor sat very still. "Pull it," she said, "but not as a weapon, only as a confirmation, in case I need to be sure of what I already know." Lena nodded once. The night before the hearing, Eleanor could not make her hands hold still. She had faced down plenty of things alone. She had faced down a bank in Vermont. She had faced down a doctor telling her how Walter's brain was going to die in stages. She had never once stood up in a room full of adults and asked them for anything, because asking and being told no was the one wound she had taught herself to stop opening when she was very young. Lena found her on the porch at dusk and sat down heavy on the step beside her, knees creaking. "You do not have to be eloquent," Lena said. "You only have to tell them the truth and let them look at you while you do it. That is harder, but it is the only thing that ever works. And if they vote to tear it down anyway, then they do it in front of every person who stood up for it. And this town has to live with their own faces afterward. Either way," she said, "you make them look." Eleanor nodded slowly. There was something else she had decided in the long dark of the past 2 nights. Something she had not told Lena yet. She was going to give Royce Tennant the page about his mother before the vote, not after. Not as a hammer brought down on him at the moment he was losing. Before, while he still believed he was going to win, so that whatever he chose to do with the truth afterward would be his own choice made cleanly, and not a deal struck under duress. Walter would have done it that way. Walter had been 12 years old in this house, and a woman had given him a gift with no string on it. And 47 years later, he had been the kind of man who held her hand every morning of 3 terrible years and did not once let go. She would do it Walter's way. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning in a low county room with bad carpet and a long table at the front. Eleanor got there 40 minutes early in her one good dress with the ledger in a canvas bag on her lap, and the page folded in the inside pocket of her coat against her ribs. People began to come in. Frank Bellamy came in his Sunday clothes with his cap in his hands and sat in the second row. Margaret Holloway came in with her cane and the silver-haired dignity of 40 years of nursing and sat in the front. Ruth Carrigan came in, the retired teacher, 81 years old, and 3 women her age came with her, who Eleanor had never met. The minister from the Methodist Church came in. The clerk from the courthouse, who had handed her the brass key 3 weeks ago, came in on his lunch break in his careful tie and sat in the back. Lena came in last and sat down next to Eleanor and squeezed her hand under the bag. By the time the chairman called the room to order, there were 47 people in a hall built for 30. Royce Tennant came in with the building inspector and a man in a gray suit she took for his lawyer, and they sat at the front like the outcome was already arranged, which it likely was. Royce glanced back at the room once and his mouth tightened. He had not expected 47 people. He gave Eleanor a small nod that was almost kind. He still thought he was about to do her a favor she was too foolish to understand. The chairman called the meeting to order. The inspector read the violations first. He read them flatly and he did not embellish. And when he was done, he said, "My recommendation is that the structure be granted a 12-month repair window under the supervision of this office, given the apparent good faith effort already underway by the new owner. That is my recommendation, and it is in writing in the file." The chairman blinked. Royce did not move, but the man in the gray suit beside him went very still. "Mr. Tennant," the chairman said, "you requested time to speak." Royce stood, and he was good at this, easy and warm and reasonable. "I want to be clear that nobody is the villain here," he said. "That house is dangerous. A woman bought it sight unseen for $15 with respect, and she cannot possibly bring it up to code at her age and means. My company is prepared to cover the demolition, settle the back taxes, and pay her a fair price on top, so she walks away with money in her pocket and a fresh start instead of a debt she will never climb out of." He spread his hands. "That is not cruelty," he said. "That is mercy. Sometimes the kind thing is to let a thing go." Heads nodded. It sounded like mercy. The chairman looked down at Eleanor. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "you are the owner of record. Do you have anything to say before we vote?" Her legs did not want to hold her. They held her anyway. "I do," she said. She lifted the ledger out of the bag and set it on the rail in front of her. This was sealed inside a room in that house, she said. A room the town did not know was there. It is a record, 60 years of it, in one woman's hand. I have read every page of it. She opened the book. She read 3 entries. She read them flat and plain, and she did not perform. She read the boy who came half frozen and got sent to Ohio with a coat and $40. She read the twin brothers whose father drank, both in the army now, and both writing every Christmas. She read the girl who had not spoken a word the whole 8 months, and the line under her name that said, "Only she's safe now." The bad carpet room was quiet. "I came back to this town 4 weeks ago," Eleanor said, "because my husband had died, and I had nowhere else to go. I bought a roof for $15 because it was the only roof in this country that I could afford. I did not know when I bought it what it was. I know now. Odessa Vane took in this town's throwaway children for 60 years. She did it alone. She did not ask for credit, and she did not get any. You called her a ghost, so you would not have to call her anything else." She closed the book. "You can vote to tear it down," she said, "but you should know what you are tearing down before you do." For a moment, nobody moved. Then in the second row, Frank Bellamy stood up. He held his cap in front of him with both hands like a man at a graveside. "1962, he said. "I was 8 years old. My father was hurting my mother, and the town knew it, and nobody knew what to do about it. Odessa Vane took me in for a winter. I learned to read at her kitchen table." He looked around the room. "I worked 35 years on the railroad," he said. "I have a wife of 41 years and 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren, and none of them ever knew I had been in that house. I am done being ashamed of the best thing that ever happened to me." He sat down hard. Margaret Holloway stood. "1966, she said. "I was 13. She fed me for 2 years. I went to nursing school. I delivered 842 babies in this county across 38 years. I am not a ghost story. I am right here." She sat. A woman near the back stood up. "1958, she said. "I was 9. My mother had just died of cancer, and my father could not look at me. I stayed 8 months. I'm a retired postmaster of this town. I held my tongue for 68 years, and I am done." A man Eleanor had never seen stood. 1974, 6 months. "I am a deacon at the Lutheran Church on Birch." A woman stood. 1981. "I was 15. I am a grandmother of 4. A man with a cane stood and could only say a year 1969, and then he could not say any more, and he sat back down, and the woman next to him, who must have been his wife, was holding both his hands, one after another, all over the room. People stood and said a year out loud, and the years ran back more than half a century, and the bad carpet county room filled up with the sound of a town saying plainly what it had only ever whispered. Royce Tennant turned in his chair and watched the place he thought he owned, the whole story of Get to its feet around him. The smooth had gone out of his face. The man in the grey suit beside him put a hand on his arm, and Royce shook it off. The chairman cleared his throat and called a recess. In the hallway, while the room buzzed behind them, Eleanor found Royce standing alone by a window with his hands in the pockets of his good wool coat, and she made the choice she had been carrying for 4 days. She took the folded page out of her coat. "This was in the room too," she said quietly, "with the boxes. I almost used it. I want you to know I thought about using it. I sat with it for 2 days. She held it out. "But it is not mine. It is yours. I think you should have it whether the vote goes my way or not. Whatever you decide to do with it after that is your business." He took it the way a man takes a paper he has been handed bad news on before. Slowly, without looking at it yet. "What is it?" he said. "It is about your mother," she said. "She was here once." His face did not change. He unfolded the page. She watched him read. She watched his eyes go down the entry once fast, then again slow, then a third time very slow, until they stopped at the last line. The line that Odessa Vane had added later, in a hand grown older and shakier than the rest. "He does not know. His mother carried it to her grave. But it is written here in case the day ever comes that somebody needs to give it back to him." Royce Tennant, who had built half the east side of this town, stood in a county hallway and read a dead woman's handwriting about his own mother, and his face came apart. "Where did you get this?" he said. His voice was different. "She wrote it," Eleanor said. "The woman whose house you are trying to tear down. She kept track of every child that ever passed through her door, and the ones who left and where they ended up. Your mother stayed the winter of 1958. She was 17. She had you in the back bedroom on the 4th of April in 1959. A doctor named Henley delivered you. He never charged a dime in 40 years. Then her people took her back," she said, as gently as she had ever said anything. "And she married. And she never told a soul. Odessa wrote it down in case the day ever came that somebody needed to give it back to you." Royce did not move for a long time. "She had a year," he said finally. The words came slow. "My whole life there was a year before she met my father. If you asked her, she would leave the room. She would not even close the door behind her. She would just walk out of whatever room you had asked the question in, and you would not see her again until supper. I thought it was something shameful. I thought somebody had done something to her, or she had done something. I built things to make up for whatever it was. I have built every building on the east side of this town for 30 years to make up for whatever was done to her in that lost year." He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. "She was a kid," he said. "She was 17 and she was alone, and somebody took her in." "Somebody took her in," Eleanor said. "In the house you came here to knock down." He looked down at the page in his hands. "Why are you giving me this?" he said. "You could have buried me with it. An hour ago I was trying to take your house out from under you. Because it is true whether I stay angry at you or not," Eleanor said. "And because somebody once taught me that a thing is not ruined just because it has been left. Not a table, not a house, not a year of your mother's life that nobody ever let her talk about." She nodded at the page in his hands. "That is yours," she said. "It always was. I just kept it for you a while." When the recess ended, Royce Tennant stood up before the vote and withdrew his company's interest in the property. He asked the county instead to grant the owner a repair timeline. He said his crews and his money were available to whoever was restoring the house on whatever terms the owner set, and that he would cover the back taxes himself in his own name with no claim attached. Then he said one more thing. He said, "My mother died 17 years ago. She had a year of her life she never named. I have spent my own life building things to apologize for what I thought was done to her. And I learned this morning that what happened to her in that year was the kindness of one stranger in a house I have spent 3 years trying to tear down. I owe that house a debt I cannot pay in money. I'm going to try to pay it in time." He sat down. The vote was not close. Outside on the courthouse steps, Lena found Eleanor and gripped her by both shoulders and did not say anything for a second, because she could not. Frank Bellamy came up and shook Eleanor's hand in both of his. Margaret Holloway kissed her cheek. Strangers who had stood up inside came to tell her a year a name, a piece of the house they had carried along for decades and could finally set down. That evening, Royce Tennant came up the hill alone in old clothes, not the wool coat, and he stood at the broken gate a long time before he came up the walk. Eleanor let him in. She did not have power yet, but she had a wood stove Frank had wrestled in for her 2 days before, and she had candles, and up in the turret the window glowed gold over the town for anyone who cared to look. "Can I see it?" he said. "The room." She took him up. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the walls of boxes, at the small iron bed, at the desk under the window, where the black paint was washed away now, and the night showed through. She found him his mother's box. There was not much in it. A hospital bracelet too small to be anything but a newborn's. A hair comb. A slip of paper with a weight and a length and the date, the 4th of April, 1959. He sat down on the floor among 60 years of saved children with the box in his lap. An old man in the dark, and he took the things out one at a time and held them. Eleanor left him there. Some rooms a person needs to be alone in. Downstairs, she stood at the front window and looked out over the town spread below the hill. The same town that had crossed the street from this house for 60 years. A few of its windows were lit. She wondered how many of them had a thread running back up this hill that nobody had ever pulled. She went down to the warm front room and sat by the stove with Soot heavy and purring against her hip. And through the floorboards overhead, she could hear the low broken sound of a 67-year-old man crying in a house his mother had been safe in before he was born. She did not feel like she had won anything. She felt like she had handed something back. The work took the whole winter and most of the town. Royce sent crews and would not put his name on a single permit. Frank Bellamy came up 3 days a week and ran new wiring in the cellar with a retired electrician named Burrell. Lena emptied half her salvage yard up the hill period doors and a clawfoot tub and a farmhouse sink, all of it at the price of nothing. Ruth Carrigan, 81 years old, brought casseroles every Sunday and refused to be thanked for them. Eleanor did the finish work herself, every door and window and stair tread with her father's plane in her own 2 hands, and the house came back under her fingers the way a wrecked side table had come back when she was 12. Grain by grain, coat by coat. She thought about Walter often while she worked. She talked to him sometimes low while she sanded a sill or set a hinge. She told him about the day's progress. She told him she had read his letter again the night before. She told him she understood now why he had been the kind of man he had been, and that she did not feel cheated of the truth, only grateful that he had carried it long enough to leave her a door into it. There was a bad stretch in February when a cold snap froze the new pipes before they were wrapped. Eleanor stood in 2 inches of water in the cellar at 6 in the morning and came as close as she had come in months to sitting down on the steps and letting the cold take her. She heard the front door open, boots on the stairs, Frank Bellamy calling her name. Behind him, Lena, and behind Lena, Roy's tenant in a Carhartt jacket carrying a shop heater. Somebody had seen her lights on too long at 5 in the morning and had called somebody else. By noon, there were 9 people in her cellar. The pipes were saved, and Margaret Holloway was on the kitchen stove making soup. This is the part the ghost stories never told. Lena said, pressing a bowl into Eleanor's hands. Takes a whole town to haunt a house. Takes a whole town to unhaunt one. That was the difference Eleanor thought between Odessa's 60 years and her own first one. Odessa had done it alone in the dark with the window painted black. Eleanor got to do it with the lights on, with people who came when the pipes froze. In May, they held a Sunday for the ones who could come. Lena had spent 2 months tracking them down, working from the names in the ledger and the envelope of last known towns. Eleanor had started calling old numbers and writing letters and following threads across 40 years in a dozen states. Not all of them were living. Some could not travel. But more than 30 of them came back to the house on the hill that Sunday, gray-haired most of them, some with their own grown children in tow. They walked through the rooms where they had been children and put their hands on the doorframe in the back hall and found the lines that were theirs. Eleanor watched a man in his 60s show his daughter a mark 4 feet off the floor, with his own name beside it and a date from 1968, and watched the daughter understand all at once where her father had come from. Royce stood off to the side for a long time with his mother's box. Then he did a thing Eleanor had not expected. He cleared his throat in that loud room and told them all who his mother had been and where he had taken his first breath, and that he had spent 50 years ashamed of a thing that had turned out to be the kindest year of a frightened girl's life. He said it so that nobody else would ever have to be ashamed of it again. Eleanor brought out Walter's box and set it on the long kitchen table beside the others, and she opened it for anybody who wanted to see. And a man who had been 10 in 1971 stood looking at the photograph of Walter at 12 and said quietly, "I remember him. He used to read to me at night when I cried." The first child came in October, almost a year to the day after Eleanor had. Lena brought him up the hill in her truck. He was 16, all sharp shoulders and watchful eyes, a garbage bag of clothes on his lap, and a chip on him you could have split kindling on. He had been sleeping behind the laundromat for a week. He stood at the broken gate which Eleanor had left broken on purpose. "This the haunted house," he said. It was not quite a question. "That is what they used to call it," Eleanor said. "My name is Eleanor. What do I call you?" "Micah." He looked up at the turret window lit gold against the dusk. "Somebody said there is a place to stay." "There is," she said. "'Tis not fancy. You make your own bed and you do your own dishes, and there is school in the morning whether you like it or not. The cat is named Soot. He is mean to mice and decent to people who feed him." She came down the walk to him. "You stay, you eat. That is the whole deal. It is the only one I have ever known how to offer." "What is the angle?" Micah said. "Nobody gives a bed for nothing. Somebody gave one to my husband," Eleanor said, "when he was 12. He never told me. He carried it the whole rest of his life, and it made him the gentlest man I ever knew. Somebody gave one to a woman whose son is paying for the new wiring in the cellar right now and will not put his name on it. Somebody gave one to me in a way of speaking when I had nothing. She stopped in front of the boy. So I keep the door open. That is the whole angle. You will spend a while waiting for it to turn into something worse. It will not. That is just the part you have to live here long enough to believe. He picked up his garbage bag and came through the gate. That night late she walked the house before bed the way she always did now. Soot trailed her down the dark hall. She climbed to the turret room last and stood at the window where Odessa had sat alone in the dark for so many years, with the paint scraped black so no one would see. The paint was long gone. The glass was clear. Below her the town lay scattered in its own small lights, and up here one more light burned where the whole place could see it. She thought about Walter. She thought she felt him in the room with her, the way you sometimes feel a hand on your shoulder, in a place a hand has been on your shoulder 1,000 times. The next morning, she found Micah in the back hall, looking at the doorframe full of names. He ran his thumb over a faded line. "Who are all these people?" he said. "Everybody who ever lived here," Eleanor said. "Going back about 70 years. He stood very still. "And you," he said, "where is yours?" She had not put it there. She had measured 100 other people's marks against that frame, and never once stood against it herself. She thought about it. Then she went and got the pencil that lived on the kitchen sill, and she stood with her back to the doorframe at 68 years old, and she handed the pencil over her shoulder to the boy and asked him to mark the line above her head. He marked it. She wrote her name beside it. Eleanor, 2026. Just below it in handwriting, 55 years old, was the line that said, Walter, 1971. The two marks were almost the same height. They sat next to each other on the frame like they had been there together all along. She handed the pencil to Micah. "Your turn," she said. He hesitated. He looked at the frame full of 50 years of names. Every single person on this wall had stood in exactly that spot, with somebody older handing them a pencil. "Home is not the place that keeps you," Eleanor said quietly. "It is the place you decide to keep." He stood with his back against the frame, and she marked the line over his head with her own hand. He wrote his name beside it himself. Micah, 2026, right under hers, right under Walter's. 3 names in a row. Soot watched from the kitchen doorway, green-eyed, as patient as he had always been. Outside, the morning sun came up over Calderwood and found the turret window, and the light it threw was no longer a ghost story to anyone who lived in that town. It was only a light in a window in a house at the top of a hill where the door stayed open. If somebody once opened a door for you when you had nowhere else to go, say their name in the comments. Say it out loud if you can. They deserve to be remembered. And if this story meant something to you, share it with one person tonight. There is somebody out there right now standing at a broken gate waiting for somebody to tell them that the door is open. It always was.